Japanese food.
Call the meeting to order. The clerk, please call the roll.
Mark.
Here.
Jay.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Jeff.
Here.
Nancy.
Yes.
Kurt.
Present.
Randy. Here.
We have a full assembly tonight, so it's now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no approval of previous meeting minutes, so we'll move to item 4, and we'll entertain a motion either to amend or approve tonight's meeting agenda.
So move.
Is there a second? Second. Motion's been made by Member Strand, seconded by Member Stanton-Grager to, without any amendments. I don't see any hands coming up for amendments for approval of tonight's meeting. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll move forward with what we have in front of us. No public hearings listed. Excuse me, no bid awards. Is there anybody in the audience this evening with any views unrelated or related to today's agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move to item 8. Is there any visitors in the audience with views unrelated to items on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Board, Commission, and Committee reports. We have a report from Local Emergency Planning Committee member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if I'm a member of the committee or just the liaison to the committee. It's kind of up in the air. But I was at a meeting like a week ago on Tuesday, and we sat down at the fire hall with all the people that are involved in emergency planning in Petersburg. And what we did is we went over all the critical infrastructure in Petersburg, highways, buildings, bridges, roads, anything that in the unforeseen emergency that might happen to, whether it's tsunami, earthquake, flooding, that would be critical to keeping the community members safe and places for people to cook meals, stay warm, and just whatever would need to happen here in the community if there was a natural disaster that happened. So we have a grant, or the city has a grant from an outfit in Anchorage that came down here to interview everybody who was involved in the process, and they kind of went through the list of all the buildings and schools and canneries and hotels and, like I said, the roads and stuff, and they just kind of updated things, and they're processing that plan, and I imagine eventually we'll see it here at the Assembly.
Okay. Any questions of Member Mucci? I've got one for Jeff. Do you have a discussion about the ammonia in the cold storages, or is that?
They did. They mentioned it, that it is a concern, and it'll be listed in their final plan about the issues in town that could cause a bigger problem in the event of a big situation in town.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure what the plants have, but I'm sure they must have some kind of plan in place, I would think. So, yeah.
I hope so.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, that brings us to consent agenda. There's one item on the consent agenda this evening, and it is for the approval of the Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department's 2018 State of Alaska gaming permit. I would entertain a motion to approve that one item on the consent agenda.
So move.
Second.
A motion's been made by Member Strand, seconded by Member Castro. So we'll do a roll call vote on that, please, Debbie.
Randy.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes?
Jay.
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yep.
Eric.
Yes.
Kurt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department has their 2018 gaming permit. It's now time for the mayor's report. Let's see if I can get it up here. Petersburg Borough is seeking letters of interest from qualified borough residents to serve our community by filling 2 vacant seats on our Public Safety Board. Borough residents appointed to the following seats will serve until the October 2018 municipal election. Letters of interest may be submitted to the borough clerk via mail to Post Office Box 329, Petersburg, Alaska, or D. Thompson at petersburgak.gov, or by delivering them to the office here at 12 South Nordic Drive. We'll give a little report here, a little update on the SEPA meeting that was in town last week, the 13th and 14th. It was pretty interesting. The SEPA is the organization that manages our two hydro plants, one in Tyee and one at Tyee Lake and one at Swan Lake down by Ketchikan. They are in pretty good financial shape, really good financial shape. They had a clean audit. Power sales are on track for this year. They're a little bit below, but their projected budget, but they figure they'll catch up on that. The lake was up, the Swan Lake was, with the new dam raise of 15 feet last year, was up 6 feet above where it's ever been in September to November. And I can't remember the kilowatt hours that gave us, but it was an offset saved spending $1 million in diesel. So it's a pretty big thing.
Nice.
There is a few things they're addressing that they're not used to due to the higher lake levels. There's a few slides, trees coming down into the lake, but they've got two booms in place, one permanent, and then there's a secondary one. So they're hoping to get some kind of a winch system farther up in the head of the lake so they could drag this debris up out of the water so they don't have to deal with it, because you have to lift it up and put it over the dam or it goes through the spillway, so there's some issues there. So that was pretty neat to see. Another thing we discussed at the last meeting was they're going to do a tunnel assessment next summer of the lake tap at Tyee, and they're going to go in 8,000 feet with a submersible, and that I think with Trey, that actually Ed Schoenfeld, the engineer, was saying that we might make the news because this will be the farthest they've ever done something like that. They've done one last Trey that's almost 8,000 feet, but it's tethered and it goes in and down a couple elevations and over. So they hope it doesn't get snagged up down there, because if it gets stuck in the tunnel, then they have to drain it. And but because they don't want to go through the turbine, of course. But there'll be sonar images that'll analyze the condition of the rock. I guess they had some issues when they first built the dam. So that was pretty interesting. So I'm blabbing about that. And the Assembly Hospital Board work session. The Hospital Board has requested a work session with the Assembly in January. Our January Assembly meetings are scheduled for the 2nd at noon and the 16th at 6 p.m. Is there a late afternoon or evening in January when the Assembly can be available for a work session with the Hospital Board? Is there any ideas? Member Mucci.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, later on in the agenda, we'll be talking about, hopefully, a marine passenger fee work session, and I don't know if there's been any discussion on a date, but I was kind of hoping we could do that one on the 8th, and I'm not sure what people's schedules are in January, but just looking at the calendar for January, we're meeting on the 16th, and the week of the, it's up to everybody else, but, we could look at Thursday, January 11th, or possibly Monday, January 22nd.
Anybody else?
I'm just throwing some dates out there.
Have they thrown out any ideas, Debbie, as the Hospital Board?
They have not, other than January.
January, so that's a pretty broad time frame. So,
Towards the beginning of January would be fine with me. What'd you say, Jeff, the 11th?
The 11th? That's like a Thursday.
Yeah, I could do something like the 11th just to put it out there.
no one wants to do it on the 1st?
Why we're having it.
Sure. The 11th I'm unavailable, but that's just me.
Yeah, this is, are you looking at your schedule, Steve?
Sorry.
Are you busy every Thursday?
Does mid-afternoon, late afternoon?
Late afternoon.
Monday and Thursdays are hard days.
Like
I can generally flexibility besides.
4 o'clock? Does that, would you be available everybody be available on the 12th? Of course, that's a Friday, but doesn't matter to me what day of the week it is.
I generally got flexibility as long as it's not Thursdays.
Friday, are you available on Fridays?
I can
And
be.
you're the liaison to the harbor, or the Hospital Board, right?
Correct.
Right, so it might be
it'd be
good to have
good
you.
there.
It'd be nice to have you here.
12th is fine by me.
We could ask the member of the hospital board that's in attendance.
Well, yeah, I don't know if he's attended any meetings yet, so.
He might make a difference.
Okay, we've kind of come up with an idea, it sounds like. How about the 12th of January at 4 p.m.? Let me look at this.
Hey, Mark, would it be too soon if we had a meeting like on the 2nd of January, an assembly meeting, to maybe have Jay come back with a good time would work for everybody on that meeting, and then we could set that date for later on that week or the next week? How do you want to do that, Jay? Do we want to just grab a number
For a
now?
work session?
Yeah.
I imagine Clerk Thompson, would be possible to email the hospital board and...
Yes, yes. If you guys are good with the January 12th at 4, tomorrow I will send an email and then send you all an email and let you know yes or no.
So what's the date we're looking at then? or-
The 12th, just to make sure it works for everybody. Yeah.
All right, they're the ones that requested, so that's to come up with a date, so. Okay, item 4 under the mayor's report, proclamation of a half-day Christmas Eve holiday on December 22nd, 2017. This has been a tradition for a long time, but I proclaim a half-day holiday for borough employees on Friday, December 22nd, 2017. Thank you for serving our community and have a wonderful holiday. And I don't see anything else under my notes, so now it's time for the manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of in that note, many borough facilities will be closed or have changed hours during the holidays. Please call ahead if you are unsure. The library held a painting class with Janine Gibbons. A display of the paintings can be seen downtown in the community. Lego Crazy, an after-school volunteer-led program, is now running again every Friday at the library. The annual Rotary Party at the Elderly Housing Social Hall was on December 17th. I want to thank everyone who was involved in that. The residents up there really do appreciate that. Carl and Chandler are continuing to work with Sitka Electric to get final answers on some of the questions prior to bringing a contract to the Assembly for your approval. So we're hoping to have that in the first meeting in January. American Red Cross has spent the last year updating their system and protocols related to aquatics. Chandler may have to partner with Wrangell to fly in a trainer to make sure that all of our lifeguard instructors are updated with the new procedures in time. They kind of sprung this on everybody. So both us and Wrangell are kind of struggling at the moment to make sure we've got time to get the lifeguard instructors trained so that they can in turn train our lifeguards. Quiscata is working on Alaska DEC paperwork and preparations for a couple of different wastewater projects. This includes the Scow Bay No. 1 pump station upgrades and the Casino Street sewer main. The used oil reserves we've been using for heat at the Baylor facility are tracking really well this winter. Basically, the department is getting the heat they need and have opened up enough storage capacity to handle any winter oil changes from the fishing fleet. Harbor Department has been great to work with on this mutually beneficial arrangement, so thanks to the Baylor as well as the Harbor Department for making this work. Our motor pool fiscal year 19 replacement evaluations have started. Vehicles from the Harbor, Parks and Rec, Public Works, Sanitation, and the hospital van are all on the evaluation list. Does not necessarily mean they'll all be replaced, but they're in the list to be evaluated and looked at. Had reported we had a snow wing problem on the grader. We got it resolved through a visit from NC Machinery technician, and our staff also assisted in finding the problem. Turned out to be a kinked separated wire that was deep in one of the many wiring harnesses. As the problem was a latent factory defect, Carl has requested relief for the repair costs from NC Machinery and Caterpillar. The grader is now back to 100%. The PFI switch project is about 2/3 complete. On Friday, December 8th, the department line crew assisted EPC, the electrical contractor, during a planned outage to change the PFI feed from old to new. The work was hampered by the weather, but the crews worked pretty well together and managed to get the power back on in about 7.5 hours. At this point, the electrical portion of the project is complete. The dirt work contractor will now be able to finish up work on the site, which includes patching the street with concrete, forming and repouring the sidewalk and curb and gutter sections, forming and pouring the new relocated retaining wall and pouring the slabs at the site. We had set the substantial completion date set at April 15th, so we'll see most of that work later in the spring. The Power and Light remodel project continues to progress. Contractor poured the retaining walls at the parking area and the subgrade foundation wall in the front of the building during the week of November 27th through December 1st. As of December 11th, plumbers from Ketchikan Mechanical are on site to rough in the plumbing, and the architect, London Millard from Ketchikan, was on site Friday, December 15th for a walkthrough and progress meeting. Rainforest contractor is almost complete with the 16 building, the siding and roofing project for the Power and Light. They received and installed the long lead time exhaust penetration flashings. We're still trying to track down a leak in the roof, and the contractor will be working on locating and fixing a leak dependent on a rental of a boom lift so that his workers can address the issue safely. We've chosen in Power and Light an independent consultant that will be working with us for the FERC Part 12D Dam Safety Report on Crystal Lake Dam. We're just waiting for a contract from the consultant. This is a project we have to do ever so often, and then we're only allowed to use the same consultant two times in a row. So this will be the second time this consultant has done it. It actually helps in the sense that they've already seen it and don't have to redo everything, but then we'll be faced with the next time around. It'll have to be somebody new and unique. That's part of FERC's requirements. Startup for the 350 generator set has been postponed from the week of December 11th to the week of January 8th. We had a scheduling problem with the factory's engineer that needed to be here for that. So they're going to be here then. Hopefully we'll get that all done. And on the Power and Light superintendent search, we had narrowed it down to our 2 internal candidates and 3 external candidates. Unfortunately, one of the external has now pulled their application, so we're down to 2. They all have received questionnaires, which is basically a list of questions that the group put together. We want written responses to those once we've received those back, and they're due back by Friday. The screening group will get back together, review the answers to the questions, and then decide on, of that group, who we should interview. And that would be a screening interview, probably either on telephone or using Skype. And from that, we would hope to have a finalist list that would actually be brought here. Our problem is we're getting very low on candidates, and I have a feeling we're probably going to be in a position where we're going to consider re-advertising. We've only spent about half of the advertising money that the Assembly authorized. Did that on purpose, just in case. So we may re-advertise, change the ad up a little bit, and see if we can generate some more. But we'll see. I mean, a lot depends on how the questions go and how the screening interviews go. So.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Any questions of the manager? Member Miucci?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. So, Steve, I've had several phone calls and questions about the new police department truck.
Yep.
And then somebody told me that was used to pull the communications van around. So funding for that, is that a city funding project or was that a grant?
It's city funding. It's part of our motor pool fund.
Okay.
Every year we provide to the Assembly a list of motor pool vehicles that are up for replacement.
Okay.
So that money's set aside ahead of time so that it's already there. We had 2 Chargers and an Expedition that we were retiring out of the police department group. Those are the 2 new Explorers, and the Expedition is the last one that will be basically taken offline and the truck replaces that.
Okay.
So instead of buying an Expedition, the truck replaces that Expedition.
And so just kind of a follow-up question, are the Expeditions capable of towing the communication van around?
I would highly suggest, if it'd be okay, with Carl and Kelly weighing into this question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Carl, you have some input here?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, the truck that was purchased is a patrol vehicle. It's not. Its sole purpose is not to pull the EOC van.
Okay.
There was a truck purchased with Homeland Security funds years ago that still exists in the fire department, and that truck was purchased to tow the EOC trailer when needed. It also serves as a search and rescue vehicle right now. So the truck that was purchased is a normal replacement, and instead of buying an SUV, we bought a crew cab pickup this time.
Okay. Yep. I have another question.
Mucci?
So regarding the power and light superintendent, so how many original applicants did we get that we're down to 4?
2 internal, 8 external.
Okay. So if we get to the position that we need to re-advertise for the spot, would we or you or the assembly be looking at changing the qualifications so that we get a larger cross-section of folks, or what are you thinking long term?
I mean, I just thought, although this is a decision that would be made in some sense by the screening group to get back together, first thing I'd do would take, we currently in the ad, it had the salary in there, we'd take the salary off. It's not, I don't have authority to exceed the salary that the assembly set, but sometimes that people focus on that when they say, okay, that's not enough, and they don't even bother applying. So take the salary off of there, gives people maybe potentially we get more applications, and we can sell them on Petersburg maybe. Or I'd have enough information I can come back to the assembly and beg and say, looks like we're going to have to pay more. Problem is I don't know if that's what's generating the lack of 8 external applications for this job isn't very good. So we're going to relook at the ad. Did I put anything in the ad that is, turning people off or not excited enough? We'll also look where we ran the ad. We ran it in the same places we always have, but that doesn't mean that's right. We'll take a look at that and say, are there better places to run it? The wording in the ad itself, and then we'll try again. We did get some. One of the things I was very interested in was trying to reach out to the military, both the Navy and the Army, and probably other services as well, but have people that do these jobs with lots of experience. I mean, when they set up a base in Afghanistan, they're not using local power. So it's people that have done that. So senior NCO or, lower level officer might have experience literally running a military power plant. The problem is there doesn't seem to be any one place you can go to reach out to the military and say, hey, do you have anybody that's coming out that might be looking for work? We did get 3 new sites from a kind of a series of phone calls we made that some veterans have used looking for jobs. So we have not run the ad in those 3 locations. We didn't feel that was right until we kind of worked through this group because they came to us afterwards. So we'll run the ad in those 3 if appropriate and see if that generates some interest. If the group looks at the ad and the job description and says, this isn't working, you're right, I'd have to come back to you. I can't change the job description without this group saying, okay, fine, let's change the qualifications. So we'll see, but it may be kind of a long, drawn-out process. We may come back to the assembly and ask to change things, change salaries, and we'll see what happens.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? And I had questions from a few people in the public, too, why the new pickup, and I talked to Steve about it today, and he explained it to me, so it was just a replacement for the former patrol vehicle. Okay, that brings us to unfinished business. First item there is a topic, travel to Washington, D.C. to meet with the federal delegation. We talked about this in late October, early November, and then the lobbyists called in, I believe, the second meeting in November. So we have a new calendar that's supplied to us by Brad Gilman, who shares his thoughts about making an official trip to Washington, D.C. to visit with our federal delegation and agencies, and an attached email. And there's travel dates, and then I think it's been circulated to the Assembly as well, a calendar that we got from Sherry Klein from Senator Sullivan's office takes you through the whole year. So, and also in this section, there's a balance of the Assembly's travel and training budget is also attached. So, for least discussion reasons, I'd entertain a motion to authorize a trip to Washington, D.C.
So move.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Member Walhooter, seconded by Member Borough. Discussion. And we have dates here. Member Walhooter.
Just to start off this conversation, I think I've done enough lobbying in my life, and I was involved in limited entry for Dungeness. I was involved in the tiered system with in the Dungeness fisheries. And you get way more bang for your buck than you do in a Palm or on a Skype when you show up in person. Two of us showed up in Juneau, and they showed us this Palm with about 80 different opinions on it, on a page of people that were opposed to it. But because two of us were standing there face to face, telling them the reasons why we should go this way, I got a pen from Governor Knowles, and so did Bill Floor, and a document that said he signed the bill. So I think it's critical that we send at least one person back there to at least voice our concerns and our opinions here in Petersburg.
I agree with everything that Kurt said. I think
Please
there's
get
a...
recognized. That makes it easier.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Kurt has said. I think that there's a lot of value in face-to-face interaction.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, I mean, Brad Gilman seemed pretty intent on it, and figured they would actually have some value if you were able to make it. I think that one of the concerns would be just if you were able to be able to speak with, adjust the timing so that you were able to meet with whomever we were trying to speak for the most bang for the buck.
Right, and then later in the on the agenda this evening, we're going to talk about our priority list that if we go back, what we'd be discussing, and I think that's important for the Assembly to address that, so whoever does go back has, marching orders from the Assembly on topics that we feel are important. And as far as the budget part of this goes, I know if three went for instance, it'd probably tap out the Assembly travel, but there's other places to get money for the travel for non-Assembly members, even if you had to do a supplemental budget or something, because I think it's important. There's some pretty important topics to talk about: the Coast Guard and dredging, and for Scow Bay, Transboundary Rivers, Secure Rural Schools, Central Air Service, and there's a whole list of them. Brandy, anybody else have a comment?
I think Nancy had something to say.
Member Gregor, Stanton Gregor? Member, go ahead. Go ahead, Nancy.
If it's my understanding from this paperwork that the first week we can meet with, that they're available to meet with, is the week of January 29th, which in January, that's the last week in the month, and somewhere I read that they expect to have made the decision about the Coast Guard within the next month. So that'll be made before the very first session we could have with them. And I understand from many of us that the Coast Guard one is the most important. So I just wonder if that would be...
It is important, and I haven't heard that. The only information that I've received and that I think has been circulated to the Assembly was from the lobbyist, Brad Gilman, and he was saying that they're talking about it currently, where they're going to end. And you did mention that one discussion he had about where the other 4 FRCs were going to be placed, and Petersburg wasn't on the list. So that being said, even if that was the case, I think the deal hasn't been done officially, to my knowledge, but we need to still talk to the Coast Guard about how they plan to replace them. I think we need to I don't want to call it force the issue, but keep bringing that issue up, because Senator Sullivan, when he was in town last fall, I guess he was here for the chamber dinner, he got a tour around town of the Coast Guard facilities and the base, and he saw how important they were it appeared like they were to Petersburg, and he's on the Coast Guard Appropriations Committee, and he told me on that tour that he would do whatever he could to keep the same level of Coast Guard presence in Petersburg, whether it be an FRC, his idea was, replace one for one, but the Coast Guard, I don't think, has that same plan in mind. So that's just my thought. Member Stan Gregor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only 2 cents on this, I would simply echo what Member Morall and Member Wolhuter said, face-to-face is better. The only addition I would make to that is I would think it would be important for you as mayor, another assembly member, and the manager to go with. I know it's more money, but I think it's that important as an investment of our time. If any of our interests can be furthered with 3 people being there, it's easily paid for itself. So I would advocate for having another member go with you and the manager as well.
Okay, thank you. Member Morall?
I have just a question. Would the manager, wouldn't be coming out of our budget, right? Managers travel for that? No?
We had that conversation today, and when they did the budget, funds are tight. And Steve, you want to I could speak for what you said today?
Sure, if I could. Yeah, the admin travel budget is pretty much all allocated. We budget that pretty tight. So the DC trip was not included in that, so there's no money currently there. The Assembly has about 5,800 unallocated travel dollars, assuming the numbers add up for the rest of the meetings that are scheduled. So, roughly, if you want 3 people to go, you're talking somewhere between $10,000 and $11,000. 5,800 is there, so 5,200, give or take. We need to pull from somewhere else. Jody's not here, but we can move money. The Assembly can vote to move money around to do that. There's not a travel budget currently that has it in it, though.
Is that using miles and every other option that we could reduce costs, or is that just
using miles will help on some of it. The biggest, let's just sound crazy, the biggest expense there is the hotel. It's insanely expensive in D.C., and the lobbyist was very specific about want you to stay here or here or here because parts of D.C. evidently are not necessarily safe. So the hotels that are close in that allow the ease of moving back and forth are all fairly pricey. So.
Member Bucci?
Well, right off the bat, I'm going to tell you I'm voting against it. I think we're going about this all wrong. I think we should, number one, try and get together. I don't know, I'm a big fan of work sessions. I know there's only so many days of the week, but it would be interesting to sit down and sort out what we want to talk about when we're going to go back to Washington, D.C. And the position that we're going to take when we're back there, so we're all talking, whoever goes back, is all talking with the same voice. If we're going to go back there and spend $10,000 or $11,000, and when the budget process comes up, say, well, it took us $10,000 or $12,000 to go back to Washington, D.C., and we're going to have to cut somebody else's budget because we went back to Washington, D.C. I'm not in favor of any of that stuff. I'd like to see, I see we're talking about marine mammals later, and we have our priority list, this, that, and the other, but I'd like to see a pretty definite list of what we want to talk about, who we're going to see. I mean, at this point, I am not clear on who we would see to talk about the Coast Guard remaining in Petersburg. Do we talk to a Coast Guard person, or do we talk to our congressional delegation that talks to the Coast Guard? I don't really understand how it works. And I'm certainly not going to vote in favor of going to Washington, D.C. just because we can, and just because our representative thinks it's a good idea. I mean, he sent us a note about why we would go back there, and a lot of the stuff he's told us that it's important for us to do. I kind of feel those are obligations that we're paying him to do. So I'm going to vote against it until we get like I said earlier, a clear list of priorities and where we're going to come up with the money that we spend out of the budget when we're looking for it in the spring.
Any other discussion? Member Castro?
Yeah. I can echo Jeff's sentiments about, diving headlong into something without quite knowing what we're going to get out of it. $12,000, $6,000 over our existing budget right now seems like a bit. But if we were able to talk or find out some connections that we would be able to have so that we would be able to meet and efficiently use up that time. I do feel that we should go over there. I remember reading, though, in Brad Gilman's email, I think he noted about the importance of perhaps limiting the amount of ideas we bring up or questions that we bring. It sounded like it'd be good if we were to focus on one or two topics. Am I correct in that?
Last time we went, we were pretty busy for 2 days. We met with Congressman Young, Senator Sullivan, and Senator Murkowski. Those were pretty small visits, but we visited the Corps of Engineers. And during that visit, on Brad Gilman's recommendation, is where we found out more about the 107 core dredging permits, which ended up getting the North Harbor dredged. So that alone was worth it, in my opinion. And as far as not knowing what we're going to talk about, when we go back there, we have a list that's been given to us by our federal lobbyist, and that's what we hire him for. And I don't know that we'd know who he wanted us to go visit with until we told him what our priority list was, and that's why it's on the agenda for later today, so we can go over the list and what are our priorities, and then we probably tell him, and he sent us the list, so he knows what they are. I feel it's important to go back and get some face-to-face time. It's been 3 years. That's why I started this dialogue back in late October or early November, and then we decided we opted in not to go, so that's why I had to ask for the lobbyists to call in the second meeting in November, so everybody on the Assembly could listen to what he had to say. And now we're at this point. So I think it's an important trip. Member Mulder?
Just one more thing I want to throw in there. We were told a while back that SRS was going to start going away, expeditiously. If we can somehow express to them how this is going to be a huge hit to our community, I mean, what's $12,000 when we're going to have to come up with $120,000 of our own money, or through the taxpayers, or come up with maybe as much as $400,000 in the next 5 years. I mean, I think it's critical that we get somebody back to face so they actually see how it's going to affect our community, and not just through Skype and not just through a palm, because that does nothing. I can tell you that right now. Face to face is the only way to do this.
Member Stanton Gregor?
It's more of a point of clarification, Mr. Mayor. With the dates lined out in there, when we're voting on this, do you want to pick something out of this right now, or is that something you intend to sort out later on?
Oh, I would think we would come up with a date at this point. As far as conflicting with meetings, we have a meeting on the 2nd and the 16th of January, February 5th, February 20th. We have borough meetings. I will be not available from the middle of March. The middle of the March 12th meeting would be pushing it. So in my opinion, it would be either January 29th or February 26th. And I think January 29th would be the preferred one. It gives us 2 meetings this evening and 2 other meetings to discuss our priority list. First, we need to come up with something to give the lobbyists soon. The date would be important, and then a couple of key issues, because it takes him a month, if not 5 or 6 weeks, to schedule all these. So that's my proposal. Sorry.
No problem. A follow-up for Clerk Thompson, please. For the sake of argument, let's say January 29th is something that's approved. In terms of logistics, does that give you enough lead time to get them set for travel a month out?
May I answer that question?
Yes, please.
Right. Sorry. I believe Brad Gilman, really wanted 6 weeks lead time. I think what he said to us was, so, yes, we can get the reservations and stuff done by then. A lot depends on who goes, sure, and how many people are going, and what Brad, when he's spoken to, what the issues are, because some agencies are harder to get into than others. So, my recommendation to the Assembly would be a little bit be a bit flexible on those dates, because once you run it by Brad and he knows your issues, he may very well come back and say, you know what, that agency, let's say it's the Coast Guard, they're hard to get in to see, so that's going to take me a little bit more time. So maybe that takes him an extra week to get appointments set up. So if the assembly could be suitably vague on the dates, that would be a little bit helpful.
Meaning, if I'm hearing you right, something like late January, early February?
There you go. Then we can talk to the lobbyist and find out, hey, what does he say? I mean, he's not on the call today. That would be that's my recommendation. Second thing, back to Member Castro's question about the number of issues to bring up. I don't want to underemphasize that. One of the things the lobbyist does is puts together a position report on a large number of issues. That's mailed ahead of time to the delegation, and they're said, here's where Petersburg's coming from. So that can be, doesn't have to be 2 or 3 items. That can be very expansive, generally, not more than 10. What you talk about, though, becomes where the limitation is. When you show up there, you might have 5 or 10 minutes. So, that's where he said the priority becomes really important. Yeah, they've got the position paper. Yeah, they know what Petersburg thinks about all of these issues. But when you get there, let's talk about these 2 or 3 things. And clearly that's different with the delegation versus an agency.
Sure.
But, so back, you can limit it. You need to limit it to priorities that you're actually going to speak to. But you can cover more than that. The lobbyists will make great recommendations on that. They'll say, you don't really need to talk about this. Hey, put it in the position paper. It's not a huge issue. This is the one you really want to push on. So there'll be some pushback from the lobbyist when he gets that list from the assembly, and he'll say, hey, these are the 2 or 3 issues you really, want to talk about. You have the best chance of getting something done. Anyway, and that's, now granted, I think Jeff's been a lot more often than I have. I've been once, so you're hearing from somebody that I've been once and talked to the lobbyist a lot, so I don't want to claim to be an expert on these trips.
Then I've only made one trip to Washington, D.C., but many trips to Anchorage and Juneau, so it's a little bit different level. Any other member of Walter?
Would it be inappropriate to say, let's shoot for the 29th of January? And then we'll just see where it goes from there.
With appropriate flexibility.
We need some direction in that way, but with the flexibility, with the, room for flexibility. But I think sooner the better.
That and the number of people.
Yeah.
Well, I think Member Castro's thoughts were accurate, and I believe it kind of mirrors what the lobbyist said, don't bring everybody, because then it gets too confusing. But he did say the mayor, the manager, and one other assembly member. Who else would be interested, or do we need to address that? Just come up with a number, I guess, and at this time, or? Member Mucci?
Well, I'm still going to vote against it, but if we want to send some folks back there, we better sort out how many people we want to send out, and we should sort out right now who can go and who wants to go. I don't want to go. I'll tell you that right now. I have no intention of going. It's just mayhem back there. It's chaos back there. Without the earmarks that are going on, I have no intention of going back there. But if somebody else has time to go back there and wants to go back there and see all the cool things back there, I'd like to hear who wants to go.
Member Stanton Gregor?
I'm fine if we want to decide who that's going to be tonight, but I also don't think it needs to be. I think if somebody who's really gung-ho and love to go with it, please speak up. Otherwise, I think it'd probably be sufficient to say the manager and mayor, and we've got several weeks to decide who that might work on their schedule as well. My 2 cents.
And after we initially contact the lobbyist back, if that's how the vote goes for the 29th, and if that date doesn't work like the manager suggested, maybe it will have to be the 26th of February, but we've already been kicking this can down the road for a month and a half, and they've been back in Washington, D.C. deciding where they're going to put the Coast Guard vessel fleet and their air fleet. So I think we need to, if we can get back there in person, we should. So any other discussion? I think this is an action item, so I think I'll ask the clerk to call.
A quick point of clarification, Mr. Mayor. So right now, to be clear, we're voting on sending, on whatever those dates, you, the manager, and another assembly member. That is correct?
That's,
Is that what I'm hearing from you? That's what I'm voting on right now?
I believe that's what the discussion was. That wasn't any form of a motion, but,
Could we leave the amount of number of people going other than the mayor and the manager and the possibility of maybe one other person, you know? I mean, do we have to be specific that says 3 or we don't go?
I guess.
I think 2 should be sufficient because then you both are going to hear different things. You both are going to have different opinions. 3 would just be a third wheel, I think, so, and would save us some money. Unless there's somebody who really wants to go.
I'm comfortable leaving it open. I just wanted to clarify what I was voting on.
I think we're just voting on a date.
Okay.
And then,
A yes or a no on a date? Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
yeah, that's fine. So, look, maybe, we did have a motion, didn't we, on the floor? What was the motion, Debbie, or was the one officially stated?
To approve the trip.
Okay. So, and then we've discussed the dates, so I think we've hashed that out, so I think we would be voting on the dates and communicating with our lobbyists to see if these dates are still available. Member Castro?
I'm comfortable with voting on a date. Only thing I'm not comfortable with is going above our allocated budget. Not knowing exactly how many people are going to go and how far above, and without Jody here being able to speak to where the money might come from. That would be my only concern.
Okay. Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Jeff?
Nope.
Mark?
Yes.
Nancy?
No.
Eric?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Brandy?
Yes.
Okay, authorization to travel to Washington DC either in January or February, or whatever dates seem the most appropriate to our lobbyists. It passes with a 5-2 vote with Member Strand and Member Mucci opposed. So that brings us to Marine Passenger Fee Work Session. Member Mucci is requesting a work session, possibly for the evening of January 8th, 2018, to discuss the idea of implementing a marine passenger fee. The work session will be open for public comment on the subject and will be encouraged to attend. A draft ordinance will be reviewed as well. So I don't know if we need to make a motion for this. It is under old business, so Member Bucci?
Yep, Mr. Mayor. Last week, the Harbor Board got together and at their regular meeting, I don't know if we have minutes from the meeting or not, but they kicked it out back to us saying they thought it was a good idea. The idea here is to hopefully have a draft ordinance in place at that meeting so we can at least start discussing some of the trying crafting this marine passenger fee to Petersburg. Most of the information that we have is based on what Juneau has, and there are probably a few things that we would need to change in that to meet our needs. I've talked to Dave Berg over at Viking Travel, and the idea is to have this work session so it would be one of the first places that the community and business owners around town would have an opportunity to comment on. And then once we had a draft ordinance in place about the fee and the structure of the fee, we would probably be, with the Harbor Master's help and Dave Berg's help, get a hold of the principals in the visitor industry and let them know that we're thinking about doing this, and either inviting them to town or getting the ordinance to them for some comments on it, on how they feel it would affect them. If it would be good for them, if they didn't have a problem with it. But I certainly don't want to exclude the people in the visitor industry from being involved in this conversation. Once we decided at the work session that we came up with a draft ordinance that we could start working at the assembly level, we would probably have it on a future agenda item to chat about. And over 3 or so readings, we would probably be able to craft some type of ordinance that would work for Petersburg. So that was kind of my ideas.
Any other discussion on the meeting? Are people available on that evening? And I have a question for the clerk, I guess, would be the appropriate one to ask. Are we going to have a draft ordinance that will be reviewed by the attorney by then, or?
It'll probably be at the attorney, I would think. I will definitely have the draft ordinance put together. Jody and I are talking about it, and we'll work on it. It may not actually have been fully vetted by the attorney at that time, but she will have it in her hands, if nothing else.
Okay, so, yeah, I can't see myself being out of town on January 8th. One thing to consider, Member Mucci, you were saying that to have the people from the industry in town, and if we, that if they can make it to this meeting, that'd be great, but if not, we're going to have 6 weeks worth of three meetings, and the second one meeting being the public hearing, so that'd be a perfect time for them to attend and voice their opinions at the assembly level. So and this isn't, a requirement for all assembly members to be there, it's just setting a date for the work session. So was that an evening, afternoon? Or is it still up in there?
Mr. Mayor, it's up to what everybody wants to do here. Late afternoons work best for me. I can certainly do it in the evening, early in the evening. I know Nancy doesn't like to, but it's up to whatever the assembly wants to do.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, I think it's important that we have it at a time when the community can be there. If we do it at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, people are still working, and maybe an evening meeting with plenty of advance notice, maybe just a brief interview with the radio station and the newspaper, telling them that we were going to have a first, more or less, work session on this draft ordinance, setting it up so that people knew about it and who wanted to ask questions about it. But I think it'd be important to involve as many members of the community as possible.
No official action to be taken at the meeting, but just a work session, right? And then I agree, if evening times tend to let more people be able to come to the meetings and be involved. Member Strand?
I prefer, of course, earlier in the day. If I were a working person and got done at 5 and had to go home and cook dinner, I wouldn't want to come back. So I think that probably no later than 4.
Any other ideas? Member Castro?
Well, I mean, for those folks right there, that might give them an opportunity during the second meeting, during the second or the first meeting in February, that they'd be able to participate during the lunchtime meeting, right? We have the noon meeting there at the first meeting in February. So it would give everybody an opportunity to be able to have some input, at least, even if it wasn't at the work session.
Very true. Member Walter?
Well, no, I didn't want to jump on you there, Mark, but I think seeing how Jeff is trying to organize this, maybe Jeff can go to the community and find out what a good time is, and then he can just advertise it. And I think what we're doing right now is just to kind of allow him to go ahead and have this meeting. So, I mean, so whatever works best, Jeff, member of the industry. And
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I want as many of you there as possible. That's what I want.
I'm unemployed.
I know. Some of us aren't.
Yeah.
And
whatever works.
I'm just trying to do its best so we can get the most of us there. And I will do my best to encourage the public to be there. But I think it's important that all 7 of us are there, so that if there are any things that need to get changed or crafted, the concerns that you might have, that you're there to help make that happen. That's why I'm asking the 7 to kind of come up with the time, so that I'll do the best I can to get the word out.
Member Stanton Gregor?
Well, in that case, speaking just for myself, I'm one of the odd ones that usually works in the evening, so it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in terms of my only feedback would be just pick a time and whoever can make it can, and hopefully I get a good turnout. Maybe I'm thinking a bit simplistic, but 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Thinking about this discussion we're having of who can attend and who we want to attend, I think it would be important to have the business owners attend, because they're going to, it's about marine, whatever it's called here, the passenger fee. So I think an evening meeting would be better. Anytime after 6 when the stores are closed.
Yep. Mr. Mayor, I'll reach out to those folks and find out a good time for them.
Can we come to a consensus that we want to advertise it for, I don't want to be the one that picks the number, everybody will get 6 o'clock work, we need to vote on it, so we're...
Should we just vote on the day and then just let Jeff tell us the hour? Come on, Jeff.
Let's do it like this. Let's vote for 6 o'clock in the evening on the 8th.
Sure.
Make it specific.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Debbie, clerk, will you please call the roll? Moving on.
Eric,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Brandy,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes, okay, so we have a meeting, work session scheduled for January 8th at 6 PM to address the marine passenger fee. Okay. We are now under new business, and we have a letter of interest to serve on the hospital board, and the gentleman is in the room, James W. Roberts III, and I won't read the letter, I'm sure we all have, but he seems more than qualified, and I'm glad someone that has stepped up to put their name in. So I'd like to appoint James W. Roberts to the hospital board, and this will take a motion and a vote.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So, yes, you know,
So let's get the motion on the floor.
I thought we said-
The motion's
I thought it
been
was on the
made by
floor.
Member Gregor, seconded by Member Morrow.
okay, so it's on the floor, right?
Huh?
It's on the floor, right?
It is now, yeah, there was a motion.
So I got this letter in our packet like everybody else, and I walk by his boat, him and his wife's boat every day, and I don't see them very often. I don't really know who they are. And, his letter sounds like it's all good. But I spent some time on the phone with him yesterday afternoon. I was just curious what his thoughts were about the hospital. I certainly don't want to appoint somebody to the hospital who wants to burn the place down and shut it down and shutter the place. I was just curious what his thoughts were. And I think Jim would probably do a real good job. And the whole process to me was a little odd that we didn't get any input from the hospital board. I'm not sure how it all works. But, yeah, I just wanted to take some time to talk to him, and I appreciate your time yesterday afternoon.
Debbie?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to point out that I actually did let the hospital know immediately when we received the letter of interest, asked if they wanted to make a recommendation to the assembly to appoint, or if they wanted me just to get it in the packet, and they said, put it in the packet.
It might be the first time in years they've had a full hospital board. Member Stanton Gregor?
That's exactly what's in the comment on, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Woods, thank you for putting your name in and being of service to the hospital. It's of great importance right now. Thank you.
All right, clerk, call the roll.
Eric,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Brandy,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James, for being willing to put your name in and help the community. Okay, Alaska Municipal League, Alaska Conference of Mayors Winter Legislative Conference, and this is, I guess here, so the manager and the clerk can decide who wants to go. I mean, this is the first time I've ever seen this done in this fashion, so
I can explain if
I
you'd
don't
like.
know. Yeah, I don't know if we need to have a motion to get it on the floor. Is it an action item? I'll entertain a motion to discuss the Alaska Municipal League, Alaska Conference of Mayors Winter Legislative Conference travel. How about that? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Motion been made by Member Stanton Gregor, seconded by Member Burrell to talk about this. Steve?
Our travel budgets, as I mentioned earlier, are tight. So the reason you've not seen this before is we just budgeted for it and went on about our way. That's not the case anymore. We're actually literally putting down, this event, how many people are going, and so in this case, this is an example. I'm not currently budgeted to go. We took that out of there to try to save some money. And I think the Assembly has, do we budget for 2 people?
At this time, I think I only put down the one, Mr. Mayor, to go.
With the timing being what it is, we have to make reservations. This is in Juneau, which means things sell out pretty quick. So we kind of need to know from the Assembly who's going to go, so we can get the reservations done. That's what it amounts to.
Okay. So, Member Mucci.
So how much is it going to cost to send people there?
Approximately $1,000 apiece.
Mr. Mayor?
Member Mucci.
So are we saying that no city staff is going, other than an assembly member or the mayor?
Mayor, that is correct. At this point, I don't believe any staff members are scheduled to go.
There is a Southeast, just for, that we're talking about travel, there's a Southeast Conference like a week before this that I do not plan to attend.
Oh, you do not?
Yeah. And if you look under the travel budget, we have our board of director, former Mayor Cindy Lagadakis, is still the board member, and so she was scheduled to travel up for that trip. And that's it's handled differently by different communities, but they will send board members, even if they're not elected officials or employees of the borough. So that's, I don't know if that's something we need to address as well, but just throwing it all on the table. We're not talking about Southeast Conference. I guess the motion is talking about AML, but we're talking budget. Member Mucci.
So what happens up at this AML, Alaska Conference of Mayors, Winter Legislation Conference?
That is when we have the chance to lobby our legislators for projects, legislation, or what other issues we have, and the Conference of Mayors is something that has been back in place for, I'm thinking probably 8 years now. Mayor Dwyer was instrumental in getting that back, and it's just discussion amongst the mayors about common priorities, and you have resolutions and goals as, you know, the Conference of Mayors that you put forward to the legislators. So I find that kind of an interesting dialogue to be, you know, talking with mayors from Anchorage, Wasilla, you know, the villages, and you get a lot of good information, and sometimes you could actually come to consensus on things and help get legislation drafted. Member Mucci.
So, Mr. Mayor, if there are resolutions that come before the Conference of Mayors, are those resolutions brought back to the community to be decided on how they should vote, or how are those resolutions? What's the deliberation in any kind of resolution that might come out of the Conference of Mayors or the Municipal League?
The Municipal League has their own set of resolutions that the board, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one person from each community votes on them. And did you do that, Brandy, after I left Anchorage, on the resolutions of the AML?
No, I had to leave before.
Yeah, that's how that's done. In the Conference of Mayors, you just vote amongst the mayors. And it's nothing to do with financial or positions of anything that I would consider detrimental to the communities. Member Strand, you have your hand up?
I am confused. This paperwork says that Board Member Lagadakis is lined up for the Southeast Conference. We're talking about AML, right?
Correct, yeah.
And you're the only person on AML. Could we get some clarification?
I did try to clarify that, but I mentioned that we're talking about budget, so I'd bring up how Cindy Lagadakis is still the board member that was appointed in September from Petersburg to that's the board of Southeast Conference. And that's in, I think, the first week in February? Or the week before AML.
Yeah.
Yeah, so whatever
It's the
those
second
dates are, 18th, 14th, something like that. Steve?
We have a slight change. Our chief may be there for the Alaska Police Standards Council Board meeting, which will either be the week before or that very same week. So the question about will staff be there, possibly we'll have somebody there.
As far as scheduling for Alaska Municipal League?
He's not scheduled to go to Alaska Municipal League, but he possibly will be in town. I didn't want to be on the record misrepresenting.
Okay, thanks. Any other discussion? And I don't know if we're voting on anything here or not, but I think this is just information.
Well, I think it was just to find out who wanted to go to AML other than you. Was there any other assembly members that wanted to attend?
No, thank you. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and since considering that we're going to go to DC and we're trying to save as much money as possible, I think that just sending the mayor is, I mean, that's what I think. I don't think that it's necessary to send another assembly member at this time.
And since we're talking about the trip to AML, and it is the legislative trip, we discussed having it on this agenda of the state priority list, and we didn't, but we're going to have it on the next meeting, and we're going to start coming up with the same discussion that we're going to have later in this meeting about the federal list of priorities to be presented to the state. It'll probably be fairly short due to the fiscal situation up there, but if you don't enter all of your projects in CAPSIS and then go to, if the lobbyist thinks there's need to lobby the legislators, we will, and I don't know what the priorities will be, but we have a few issues on the table, like Scow Bay and dredging and on and on. So, I guess this isn't an action item we have to take action on, so if everybody's all right with it, we'll just move on. Right. Okay, next item on the agenda under new business, item C, numbered 17-360. It's 2018 renewal of professional services contract with state lobbyist Ray Matiashowski and Associates, and that contract is $42,000 a year. I'll entertain a motion to renew that professional services contract.
So move.
Second.
Motion been made by Member Strand, seconded by Member Morrell to renew this annual contract with Matiashowski and Associates. Discussion? Member Mucci.
Mr. Mayor, so as far as I could tell, thanks to staff's help, Ray also represents SEPA, the City of Ketchikan, the Ketchikan Gateway Borough, the City of Saxman, and the City and Borough of Wrangell. So representing all of our neighbors, how do we know we're getting the best representation for our town?
Well, since I've worked with Ray since we've hired him, and I think that was shortly after I got on the council, so I would say it's been at least 8-9 years ago. I remember Melinda Hofstad was here, and he has done great work for us, Ray is. He's very, I don't know the right word. I respect Ray. I think he does a great job. He works hard. He used to be in Tony Knoll's staff. I can't remember his position, but it had to do with dealing with his whole crew. So from the trickle down from that staff, I mean, Ray knows everybody in Juneau. I mean, if you need to get into the right person at the right time to help push legislation through, Ray's the right guy, I think, and last year was a prime example when we were dealing with the land, the extra land we got in the legislation last year, Senate Bill 28 or whatever the number was. So anyway, that's my take. I think we get a good bang for our buck with Ray Matiashowski. Member Castro.
Yeah, I'm not at all for discontinuing our service with the lobbyist, but I am curious as to what is a typical lobbyist cost? I mean, speaking of bang for the buck, is there a normal rate, or is there?
I couldn't answer that. I mean, I don't know how long we've been paying Ray. This is a little bit more than we originally contracted with us 10 years ago, but I don't know what it is, Steve.
We've raised it once in the 6 years I've been here, if that gives you some idea. And as far as what other lobbyists make, I think there are some that make a lot more, and there are some that probably make less. I can tell you I don't have any experience here in Alaska with what some of those lobbyists make other than just kind of war stories from some of my peers, that some of them are fairly pricey. But that's not based on an RFP process or anything like that. I mean, I too, if I may trust Ray, he works his tail off for us. I mean, when money was free-flowing, it was really easy, and it's real easy to say, oh, what a great job Ray does. Actually, the great job was like last year where we were trying to get a lands bill passed, and there was a lot of resistance to it, and he really worked the room. He worked with our delegation there, and basically did a really good job, in my opinion, of getting support together. And that doesn't always mean arm twisting. It was, working with Jonathan's office, working with Bert Stedman's office to make sure their staff was up to speed, working with Liz, who went up there several times to work with them. I trust him, and, back to a secondary mutual question about the, representing different cities. He's always been very straightforward. If there's any kind of a potential conflict, he says it right away. He was up for potentially being the Juneau lobbyist, and, several of us thought that would be a bit of a problem, because not always is Juneau lined up with us. And, that he made that very clear. Okay, fine, then I will, not be a part of that. So, again, I trust him.
And to answer Member Castro's question, how much lobbyists make, you can go to Alaska Political Offices Commission and look it up, and some of them are pretty good jobs. Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Jay?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Brandy?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we voted unanimously to continue the service contract with Ray Matuszewski as our state lobbyist. Next item under new business is D, federal legislative projects and priorities. And we discussed this a little bit earlier in the meeting, but I'll entertain a motion to start. I don't think we'll get completed tonight, possibly. We used to have special work sessions to do these when there was money flowing, and it took time to, everybody's in there knowing they can get their hand in a cookie jar. But anyway, I'll entertain a motion to draft some sort of a federal priorities list to take to Washington, D.C. and to send to our lobbyist.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Castro, seconded by Member Morrell. We have a list here. I think, does anybody have any ideas?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'll throw my 2 cents worth in here, seeing how these things here will directly affect the taxpayers, and that is the SRS and PILT. I think those two are really critical. And then something that's close to my heart is that Section 107 Army Corps. But anyway, I would think that SRS and PILT should be probably 1 and 2, and then number 3 should be Section 107 Army Corps.
Member Stanton-Greger?
I mean, before you, Mr. Mayor, go back to D.C., I think we could hone, your talking points and be a further discussion. But in terms of a generalized thing, I think this list in and of itself is sufficient. One thing I would add to the Coast Guard one, though, is the cutters. They can deal with transboundary rivers, which could, could help for intersecting drug traffic, etc. More of a, I think, a selling point for our community, the interboundary rivers part for the Coast Guard and the cutters. And that's a relevant angle to take when pushing that.
Okay, yeah, and I would hope we would have more discussions after we get an idea from the lobbyist, what topics are the key ones to talk about, not just send it as in a list. And, excuse me, I've been looking through, or maybe I'm missing it. I don't see transboundary rivers. Oh, yeah, here it is. British Columbia transboundary mining issues. Okay, it's under a different title. So, Member Stanton-Greger.
Yeah, just finishing that thought, I was also, you kind of took the words there, which is good, to speak with the lobbyist in terms of, I think it'd be worthwhile running some of this through him, seeing what would be, he sees his priority at this point. Might make sense.
I remember in the conversation at the second meeting in November when he called in, he did touch on a few of the topics that are on the list, and the ones that he didn't feel were, and Steve talked to this earlier, just send them the list. I mean, the ball's already rolling. People know that essential air service is important, and PILT and Squirrel Roll schools, but you could still touch on those maybe. But I think the ones that we'd want to, if we weren't going to different departments back there, to talk to our delegation would be the Coast Guard still is a top issue, and dredging of our harbors, and the transboundary river, I think, is an important issue as well. And last time we were back there, Steve and I were talking, the manager and I were talking about this today. Maybe we could get in to talk to Secretary of Interior's his underling. I'm sure we weren't going to see him. We were just lucky when we were waiting in Senator Sullivan's office last year to meet with him, and that was, well, it wasn't last year, 3 years ago. It was Secretary of Energy. Yeah, so we got to go in and talk to him. So that was interesting. We got to put a plug in for our Lake Tap being green energy and on and on. But you never know who you're going to get a chance to meet with. So we need to, I think a discussion with the lobbyists, now that we have decided to go back would be good. Anybody else on the Assembly have ideas of how they should be prioritized, or if there's any they'd like to see removed for any reason? Member Castro?
Yeah, I just had a real quick question about this, the home porting of the Coast Guard vessels. I read here in Brad Gilman's update here that they expect a decision on the FERC home port issue within the next month. Is the next month, is that before the end of January, or?
Where did you read that, Member Castro?
It's number 2, the second bullet. Under status of federal priorities. To the very end of the little. Oh. It's on the 1214 Washington update PDF.
I'm slow.
Is this on the list of priorities?
Yeah, it was just kind of an update I think he was giving us on the...
Oh, here we go.
Oh, you got it now.
In fact, it's in memo to you, Mark. Maybe, I don't know if it was an email or an actual letter.
No, it's not. It was just sent to the Assembly and the manager and everybody. It's ended up in the packet.
It does sound like, though, we have some representation. Sorry.
Yeah, sounds like they are expecting the decision soon.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying earlier, even in my opinion on that Coast Guard ruling, even if, and we've had this discussion with, a few people in Juneau about options, and maybe get buoy tenders here, or something to replace the number of people we're going to lose. And I know Senator Sullivan feels that way. We need to keep the same number of Coast Guard men and women in Petersburg. So. Thanks for bringing that up, though. Yeah,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
One of the items on there, it's easy to overlook, but I think Brad, when we spoke, was pretty thinking needs to be one of the top 3 issues was the infrastructure question.
Okay.
There is discussion that the president will push forward next on some kind of national infrastructure program. Brad's point was, it's really important to talk to the delegation about making sure there's a small city rural component of that it's not just $200-300 million projects to, replace the Golden Gate Bridge or something. I mean, it's, in other words, to continue to remind the delegation that infrastructure is not necessarily just big, massive projects. So my guess is Brad will come back and make that recommendation to the Assembly that that's one of those things to make sure that our 2 senators and congressmen remember that when they go to vote on that, if in fact the infrastructure program gets put together.
Make it similar to the Tiger Grant program as for rural under 50,000, something along those lines.
Puts a pot of money that is for smaller rural communities, which would help us potentially at things like Scow Bay or other stuff. So, anyway,
looking at this. Is it listed on here anywhere? With maybe you'd know without me looking through it all. Anything to do with the bypass road behind the airport? I don't see it.
No, it's not.
Maybe I could ask Mr. Hagerman a question on that. Carl, do you see that as I know that it's been in the discussion on priorities over the last decade. Do you still see that as a necessary or an important road to have brought up to grade so it can be open or brought up to standards?
Well, Mr. Mayor, you're right that project has been on a list for quite a few years. I think it would definitely provide, an alternate transportation corridor to Petersburg. The focus has been on, Hammer Slough Bridge and being able to get by that pinch point if there was a natural disaster that caused an issue there. For that reason, it probably should still stay on there. There is private property on that bypass road that could be developed if the road was upgraded as well. So there are more advantages to just being a transportation corridor for Petersburg in the future.
Well, I think in the discussions before, since the fire hall was moved up by the airport too, it was discussed how it would be a good route if that was open for the emergency vehicles to get to Scow Bay and out that direction. But
it'd be even better if we had a stoplight that we could go across the runway and get to it quicker, but that's probably not in the plan.
Any other discussion on this? So this is, Member Strand.
I think the essential air service funding is important as well, especially since our ferry service is being cut so drastically. We don't want to lose whatever helps keep air travel available.
It should definitely be a part of the list, if not the discussion. So, I guess we'll wait till we hear back from the lobbyist. Is that Steve? What's your recommendation? What do you think we should do?
Well, I was looking at his email that he put together, letter on the 14th, and that's a pretty big list. And this is kind of what I was talking about. This is kind of the position paper. So it's likely he would want to send a version of this to the delegation. The question then comes down to is which of the top 2 or 3 items that, are you actually going to talk about when you get there? We need some input from Brad to know, Member Strand is correct about essential air services, but I think his take on that was there's so many communities that are in favor of this and getting it, it's not really in the chopping block. So you don't want to waste your 2 minutes of fame talking about that one. That may change, but for the moment, I think that's the last thing he said. So we probably need to take this list, give it to Brad, and say, hey, that letter you sent the Assembly on this, what do you think are the top 2 or 3 items? And, then we can bring it back to the Assembly, hopefully by the next meeting, and say, this is what the lobbyist is recommending.
Maybe he could... we could email him the list prior to the first meeting in January. And I don't know if he'd be available, but he could maybe call in again. It's on the 2nd. It's a noon meeting.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah. Let him make his case for which ones.
I can see one. I don't know if I should say it, but take the pink salmon disaster assistance off for 2016. But we could have that discussion. Maybe you could still be on the list, but.
Yeah.
Okay, so is everybody good with where we're at on this list formation? Okay. We'll move on to the next item, communications. We have a letter that came from Senator Sullivan's office. Staff sent this attached letter regarding the Marine Mammals Protection Act. Senator Sullivan does intend to work on Marine Mammal Protection Act issues in 2018, but there is not yet a specific time/plan. If there are ideas that you or others in the community have to affect the sea otter issue, I can set you up with our staff that will be working on that in D.C. If you or others in Petersburg end up going to D.C. and an in-person conversation would be even better, just let me know. Thanks for reaching out. And I've talked to a few... since our last meeting, and we mentioned Marine Mammal Protection Act, I've had a few people get a hold of me or bump into me on the street and say, well, what's going on? Because it does affect the fisheries. And I don't know if we should reach out to the people in the fishing industry and the natives that are in our area, just to let them know this is going on. But maybe we could ask for input, and this is just my thought on this from PIA, local processors, Petersburg Vessel Owners, Southeast Alaska Fisheries Dive Association, USAG, which is United Southeast Alaska Gill Netters, which doesn't seem like they'd be affected by mammals, but most of them, not most of them, but a good number of them here in Petersburg have Dungeness permits and other shellfish permits. And there's locals that have still harvest otters around Petersburg. I've got a list of them I could give to the the clerk and possibly Cake Tribal and Gold Belt, since they're native corporations in our, with it, well, Cake's not in our borough, but Gold Belt is. Just to see if we could get some input on this Marine Mammal Protection Act revisitation that Senator Sullivan's going to do. Any other discussion on this? This was my idea, that's why I chimed in, or I put this correspondence forward.
Nice.
Member Mucci.
So did Senator Sullivan say they're planning to rewrite the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 18?
He talked about it, yeah. He already has had hearings on it, and plans on addressing it. And in particular, part of it, he wants to talk about the otters and the discussion or the talk and or the regulations that what you have to do for the otters to make them sellable for the natives. So anyway, and Member Castro, you wanted to bring this up under communications?
Yeah, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, and speaking entirely as a fellow community member, just wishing to inform my neighbors, the U.S. Forest Service is going to be increasing their National Forest visitor use maps. The increase of price is going to go from $10 to $14 here on January 1st. Just last year, Petersburg Ranger District created a new visitor use map that is it's excellent. It's a plasticized, it's tear and water resistant, and it provides all of the typical geographic features, roads, trails, land ownership, and such. It also kind of has a lot of points of interest. It's a very well produced map, yeah, as of January 1st, this map is going to increase from $10 to $14. And even at $14, it's still a deal compared to going to REI and picking up any National Geographic map. And of course, I'm not advertising this at all. It's just I feel that people ought to be aware of this new map because it's a really, really useful item, and I think everybody could be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you, Member Castro. Is this a map that's in such a scale that you could use to go hiking
Yeah. It's it has two sides to it. It has Mitkoff Island, and then it has Kupernoff and QU Island on it as well. And it's not the typical quarter quad, the 1 in 24,000. So maybe it's not great for setting off up to a muskeg to be able to bag your deer, but it's great as an overall kind of general landscape sort of a thing, and it's nice because it is so durable that it's money well spent.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Is there anybody else with communications they'd like to bring forward? Being none, assembly discussion items is the next item on the agenda. Recognitions. Anybody have any recognitions? There's two over here. I guess.
No, I don't have. No, I was just saying goodbye.
I'm just kidding. Member Castro.
Well, this isn't really a recommendation, but I'm sure folks in town have noted in the paper that there is a first responder contest ongoing, and it's Life Med Alaska. It says to celebrate Life Med Alaska's expanding service to Petersburg, we're giving a $1,250 prize package to a Petersburg first responder. So I would like to let everybody know about that, seek it out in the paper, and try to vote for your favorite first responder.
Okay, great for bringing that to our attention. I'd like to, I didn't make it to the opioid discussion last Friday night, I believe it was, maybe it was Thursday night, the Suns, but I'd like to I'd like to recognize Jonathan Christ Tompkins for bringing the people to town and having that forum in town. It was well attended, it sounded like. So, any other recognitions? Okay, moving on. Next item under item discussions is Skype option with federal and state elected officials and lobbyists. This has been brought forward by Member Mucci. So, Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, we've been talking about traveling back to Washington, D.C. and Juneau, and our congressional delegation travels through Southeast from time to time, and I was trying to sort out what our abilities are to Skype with those folks. I mean, do we have, I guess I'm asking Steve or Debbie, do we have the ability to Skype with those folks on a regular basis? Just come in and have a work session in the afternoon or something and tell them what is going on in Petersburg? Or is that something that's just everybody else Skypes and FaceTimes and stuff, and we're getting all of our stuff together here we Skyped during the candidate forum? Is that something that we can do?
I can answer it two different ways through the mayor. Us, yes. We have the technology. We can set it up, and there's really no limits other than people's time. We're not getting an overwhelmingly positive result back from our legislators in either place. So I'll speak to Jonathan, who is probably the most upbeat about it. Yeah, we could do that. But, and that becomes the big issue, which is once we get into session, things are so crazy, it's really hard to do set meetings and not have to, so he was worried about having an assembly sitting here and a bunch of community members here, and then suddenly he's got a floor call and has to run off, and he says, and that stuff starts to happen so quickly that there's not a lot of time. So, but he said, yeah, certain issues, certain times, we could do Skype. I don't believe we've received a response back from our federal delegation at this point. I think they were going to ask and find out, what their interest level was on that. Mayor, I don't know if you ever, I have not heard from Senator Stedman on that. Do you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, so I think... again, two parts of the questions. Yes, we can do it here. We have the technology. We've done that. The question is, will our delegation, are they able to do it? And we're not getting a overwhelmingly, yeah, we'd love to do it yet.
Member Mucci.
Well, I'm sure they don't really want to do it, but in a time when money is so tight, how come we just can't Skype with their key staff people on a monthly basis and tell them kind of where we're at on things? If we're going to put together a list of 2 or 3 pages of priorities for the community, how come we can't kick that to them early via a Skype session so that they know these things are kind of on our radar, and we're kind of, we're kind of wondering what's going on with funding for this, all the issues that we want. In a time when there's earmarks are gone, and you're talking about essential air service and PILT and the secure rural school funding stuff, we have to be pretty honest with ourselves that some of these monies are going to go away. And I think the more contact we can have with them, whether it's Skype or, I'm not, I already voted against going back to Washington, D.C., but, there's got to be other options than flying back and forth to Washington, D.C. often.
I'll do the mayor. If the Assembly as a body wants me to suggest, once a month meeting with each of them, this is where it comes into, is the general question is, can everybody Skype? The answer is, yeah. Even the delegation will say, sure. Well, can we get together every week? Oh, they start to pull back. So it's not necessarily the technology use, it's more about the timing and what their worlds are like when they're in D.C. or Juneau. So, I'm not trying to push back, other than I guess maybe in some sense I am, which is I'd almost need to hear from the Assembly, what are you thinking? Do you want monthly meetings? Do you want me to ask about monthly meetings? Do you want me to ask about quarterly updates? We can ask, and we can push forward on that and see what they say. We'll have to get a little more specific on how we're approaching this. Right now we're saying, hey, you guys Skype, and they're kind of saying, yeah, but tell me exactly what you want to Skype for. So, I'm pushing it back to say, tell me what the Assembly as a body want to do there, and then we can go back to them and say, hey, we'd like to set up a once-a-month meeting with the Assembly and, whoever.
Hope that makes some sense.
Member Walhooter, you have a comment?
Maybe that's probably a good idea, Jeff. Maybe we could start with just our lobbyists, because, they're probably a little more flexible. So if we have some very specific things that we want to talk to our representatives, maybe we could just start with going through our lobbyists, and then make sure that they reiterate that to our representatives. So maybe we could start on a small scale like that, and then we'll just see how it plays out. So I'd be in favor of something like that if we started with lobbyists.
Member Stanton Gregor?
I mean, I have obviously no problem if one of our representatives or staffers wants to Skype with us about some issue or another. But that being said, that's what Ray and Brad are for. I think the idea of those day-to-day, monthly, weekly things, I don't see, in my mind, I don't see it as a priority in any way, shape, or form. I'd rather send Brad an email or Ray an email or call one of them and tell them what's important and have them do the legwork for it. My 2 cents on the matter.
Member Morrell, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I don't know. I find FaceTime and Skype to be kind of awkward myself, and I think that it'd be odd for to put a lot of people up on a screen and just be staring at them. I think that there's, just like Member Stanton Gregor said, we correspond with people, email, on conference calls, and we have lobbyists that we use, and I don't necessarily think that that's necessary at this time.
Member Strand?
I agree with Jay. I believe that that's what we pay our lobbyists for, at least for the first and second contact. We just renewed Ray's contract. We might as well give him something to do.
I think what Member Mucci is bringing up isn't a bad idea in certain cases. I think it would be very beneficial if our lobbyist says, hey, there's this issue, and we don't have money or time to travel back. If we could set up a Skype, whether it's with maybe the senator's staff, or I don't know what the odds are of being able to sit and Skype right with the senator, but surely maybe one of their immediate staff, we could convey our interest on certain topics. But I don't know about setting up, and I don't know if Member Mucci was suggesting setting up a scheduled call-in or a scheduled Skype session.
And we could do that with the lobbyist. I mean, if that's what the assembly, I mean, we could add Ray and Brad to the meeting at some point. I mean, it's really left up to your imagination from a standpoint of how often do you want to receive updates from these folks.
Member Mucci?
Yeah, the question wasn't to bug the senators back in Washington, D.C. with a Skype once a month. I think it's important, like if the city or the borough wants to go back to Washington, D.C., we're putting a face with the community. And this technology gives us a chance to do it from Petersburg so they can see the 7 of us and see who we are and at least listen to us maybe on a quarterly basis. Definitely not the senators and the representative, but they're key staff people who are the real people who are doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Those are the people that I want to really reach out to and press our case to.
Member Castro?
Yeah, I totally agree. Really, kind of with everybody. I feel that the Skype sessions, there are benefit to them because there is some FaceTime, but we're going over to Washington, D.C. and rubbing elbows and actually having the direct face-to-face contact is very important. You said, Mr. Mayor, that it had been 3 years since you'd head to Washington, D.C.?
I believe it has been.
So in that case, maybe if we weren't doing anything even quarterly or biannually, we could be able to once a year or just kind of on as an as-needed basis, be able to utilize this technology. I think it's a tool in our tool belt.
Yeah, it's I guess we used it during the candidate forum or whatever, so I don't look good on screen.
Well, this room is set up for it. It's kind of my point. I mean, technology-wise, we have the ability
We have
to do
the
it.
ability, so maybe it's something we should exercise in the future. Member Mucci?
So before we get lost on who I wanted to talk to and when I wanted to talk to, I just wanted to know if it was the technology that was available to staff in Washington, D.C., so that it's something that we could explore doing here. That was all I wanted to know. I wasn't concerned about when we were going to talk to them, but I just wanted to know if that was a technology that we could take advantage of.
We haven't got Through the mayor, my apologies. We have not gotten confirmation back yet that they're willing to do it. But I can tell you this much: when we're there, if in fact, I'll look and I will ask staff member. We'll see what they say. Some of it might even be people like Sherry Klein, who's not in D.C. but is in Southeast. Is there value in Skyping with her, for example? There may be even more close to home staff members that we could use that technology with. So we'll find out.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we've almost... Is everybody done? No more comments on the Skype issue? Okay. Next item under discussion is history of the senior sales tax exemption. And Member Mucci, you wanted to discuss this?
Yeah, over the last couple of months, I've been kind of looking at, the different exemptions that we have in town. And thanks to Jody and Debbie for getting me information. I was curious how we got to the senior citizens sales tax exemption. And I was under the impression that it went to a vote of the public and it passed by a vote of the public. But it appears that in January 7th, 1980, the senior sales tax exemption was approved in its third reading by the City Council and did not go to a vote of the public. But we have it now. So in January, that's just a little bit of tidbit to have out there. In January 2015, there were 465 active exemption cards. And as of December 18th, there's 550 active cards out there. Currently, there's about $2.9 million in 2017 that have been exempted from taxes based on groceries and hardware from Chelan Produce, Hammer Weekon, Grocery and Hardware, Trading Union, The Trees, including fuel and gas from Arrowhead Transfer, Petersburg Bottled Gas, Petro Marine, and Southeast Island Fuel. So based on that $2.9 million exemption, the city is missing out on $178,975 in sales tax that come to the city. And I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay.
Because it's going to be part of a discussion at some other later date. Since
this was approved by the council, I guess, in 1980, it has been on the ballot a few times, hasn't it? Remember me that out? Or?
I'm sure there have. I don't have any information.
Right, okay. But I just thought it had been put to the public before and it got...
I think there have been
okay.
issues on it.
But thanks for the numbers. Yep. Are there any other discussion on this? Member Strand?
As I recall, we didn't have to put it before the public vote, and it was described as kind of a reward for people who'd lived here and worked all their lives and been paying in, and this gave them a little bit of money back. And I think they've probably got it by now.
Okay, any other discussion? Member, or Steve, you have a comment?
This is the danger of not having Jody here. I think the numbers that Jeff read, and I'd have to talk to Jody directly, I think they're low.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, the number I'm familiar with is somewhere north of $330,000. One estimate up to $374,000 in lost revenue, but there's some assumptions built into that, so that may be the issue. So it's, and by the way, that probably doesn't include borough utilities, which are also exempted from sales tax, other than the harbor. So electric, water, sanitation, none of those are sales tax are not levied on those. So you add those into the mix, it's probably even a greater number.
Okay, thank you. Member Strand?
I talked to Jody this afternoon, and she said that it also did not include the tax cap exemption.
Oh, that's over 1,200.
And that it was over 300,000 without having taken the tax cap exemption out.
Okay. Member Walhuter?
I just wanted to add one more thing to to that ordinance, and I've read that thing over probably 10 or 15 times, and it specifically says if you're age 65, this ordinance was to help alleviate financial hardship, which is something that's never been defined. So I think we'll probably have a chance January, February to maybe talk about what alleviating financial hardship means. So thanks for bringing that up, Jeff.
Member Morrell.
I was just curious, can we ask Jody to get an estimate of the total with utilities and all of that that's missing, just so we have a better idea of what kind of tax revenues we're missing out on?
Sure. I'm sure she could come up with the numbers. Member Castro?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and just as a point of clarity, is that an annual figure, or is that since 1980?
Annual figure.
Okay.
It's a scary number because it's growing every year.
This is the last comment on this. You know, if you go into the different sections, you know, we always just read about the very first part, 65, and then alleviating financial hardship. There's actually fines attached to using that card illegally. In other words, buying something other than for yourself. It's a $100 fee. If somebody uses your card and you're not, you know, it's a $300 fine. I don't recall ever anybody getting fined or anything by, and I have observed more than once what I would assume would be a grandmother buying 2-month-old diapers for somebody that's standing behind them that looks close to a relative, and you know, so where's the $100? You know what I mean? So I think there needs to be some. I don't want to get rid of it. I just think we need to look at it, you know, and maybe amend it. So anyway, again, thanks, Jeff, for bringing this up, and we'll talk about this in January, February.
Right, budget time.
Yeah, budget.
And, you know, talking about ordinances that are on the books and that don't get enforced, you know, there's the leash law, and there's the no-wake law, and there's, you know, on, so you know, pick your poison. So, anyway, moving along, if we're done with that one, administrative fee for senior sales tax exemption participants. Member Mucci?
Mr. Mayor, this is kind of part of the same conversation. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we can't continue to hemorrhage $300,000 or $400,000 a year in missing tax revenue. We just can't. I mean, we'll be closing down the library or whatever, and not being able to fund the schools. I mean, there's got to be a way to adjust this senior citizen sales tax exemption so that it really does meet the needs of the people who need it in town. There's a way to identify people who need it in town. And, you know, our options are to draft some type of ballot initiative to try and repeal the senior citizen sales tax exemption. Or we can start assessing a fee for administrative costs for handing out the cards every year. I mean, I think we can come up with, the city staff can come up with a pretty good idea of how much it costs to issue those cards. If it's $50 to maybe $100 for staff time, the printing time, checking to make sure people are eligible for it. And perhaps by coming up with an administrative fee, some people who maybe don't really need it won't think it's worth the $50 or $100 that they might save in kind of sales tax. I'm just trying to sort out a way to kind of make it palatable. I mean, if you look at the list of all the folks who are eligible and taking advantage of the, it's pretty impressive. There's like 11 pages of our friends and neighbors who maybe don't spend all of their time in Petersburg. They might be spending 9 months here. They might be spending the rest of the time in Desert Palms or wherever the heck they go, but they're certainly eligible for it based on the criteria that's in there. And I think we need to kind of make people understand the pain that we're feeling up here, and if they don't really need to save 12 cents on an item they're getting at the grocery store, I mean, it's making a good program. It's making it tough for the people who really need it. And I know there's some figures out there of 80 to 90 people in town who really need it, but for a third of the community that is eligible for this exemption, I think things have got to change. I mean, there's got to be a way to make it so that we're a little bit more responsible for stuff. And I'm hoping that that discussion can happen over the next month and a half before we all leave town to go fishing.
Any other discussion on the administrative fee? Okay. That brings us to questionnaire circulated to the public by Assemblymember Mucci. I brought this up. It was brought to my attention that Member Mucci was, have a questionnaire he was asked, just asking questions, referring to budget items and stuff from people around the community, and I haven't, got one, and I was just wondering what Member Mucci was going to do with the information. He just using it, just curious, out of curiosity. So is it something you're just are you gonna, if you come up with any answers, like, are you getting consensus, or if you come up with a direction with this questionnaire, are you gonna share it with the Assembly, or is this?
No, not necessarily so, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon me?
Mr. Mayor, not necessarily so.
Oh, okay, I'm just curious.
When I was appointed to the Assembly back in whenever, July or something, I kind of sat in the seat and I was just listening to what was going on at the Assembly level, and we were just pushing business along, and I thought to myself, well, it's hard for me to understand what Assemblymember Eric Castro is interested in. I mean, I just don't know what you're all interested in. And so I took it upon myself to, originally I put together like a 5-page list of questions that I had about the community. As one of the first questions we had was, we were going to approve the city manager's evaluation. And I don't really pay much attention to what Steve does. So I just kind of went through all the departments and asked myself a bunch of questions about what was important to me. Then I started talking to people. And I found that people really like it when you come and sit down and hear what they have to say. That's not me talking to them. It's just me listening to them. I've talked to the Rotary. I've talked to several businesses downtown. Some people have invited me to their businesses before the working hours started, and I sat down with all their employees, and I wanted to hear what was important to people, because I know what's important to my friends. I know what's important to me. And I know what's important to the guys at the Harbor Shack and stuff, but, I'm talking to young women who are working, and daycare is a big one. Some people have asked about having the libraries open on Sunday afternoon because people who work 5 days a week can't get there on a regular basis. Some people have asked about having the Baylor facility open on Saturday afternoons, so some of us who are working 5 days a week can get there instead of just on a Sunday afternoon after church or whatever. They can get there on Saturday as well. But there's some real harebrained ideas out there. And that's just part of the process. Mm-hmm. But every so often, everybody has like a nugget that's really, really interesting that I run with for a while. And I hope nobody's threatened by me asking questions of the community, because I'm going to continue to do it as long as people will listen to me. And I really, obviously I like to talk. I'm the guy who's putting all the stuff on the agenda. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It's just interesting to hear what people have to say. I mean, a lot of people feel real intimidated coming up here and saying what they want to in front of the microphone. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing my best to just kind of reach out to the community and whoever else has an interesting viewpoint to kind of let me know what they're thinking. But that's the only thing I got going on.
Member Waller.
Yeah, Jeff, I think I would find this informative if you could maybe, I like talking to people too, as you well know. It'd be informative to find out, what you feel that the community's thinking about certain things. If you could, would you like to maybe put together some cliff notes on some questions, that you think's important, or that what people think's important to this community? Because I'd certainly like to hear them, without having to go to talk to everybody myself.
Member Mickey?
When I'm sitting down with folks, one of the first things I tell them, I said, this is just between you and me. Mm-hmm. I just want to hear what you're thinking. I've told them that I'm not going to divulge their thoughts, to the public. Usually what I do is I get their comments, I go through them, I write down some notes that are important to me, and then I shred the document. But I'm eventually going to bring up some things that I hear from the community, and like I said, every so often you get some harebrained ideas, but every so often somebody brings up something that's really cool that we haven't talked to before, like the marine passenger fee. That's not my idea. Somebody brought that up to me in some kind of discussion we were having and wanted to know why we weren't doing it. And I said, oh, that's a really good question. And we're kicking that can down the road. So, nope, I'm just talking to folks.
Member Castro?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just touching on what you were saying there, Michi, was about like the feeling of discomfort having to get up and sit in front of the assembly with a microphone in your face. I remember John Murgis ended up saying something along the lines about maybe having a suggestion box of some sort. And I was wondering if maybe there was something like that in the mix.
Steve?
Through the mayor. In a sense, my 3 meetings that we're going to be having coming up here in January about ways to save money or raise revenues is a version of a suggestion box. Maybe I'm risk averse. I'm not overly fond of anonymous feedback, simply because it can get way out of hand in a hurry. Maybe shame on me, but I'd like to go through these 3 meetings with the public and see what kind of input we get, what kind of feedback we get, and maybe that'll prompt us to find new ways for people to give us input. And like you said, maybe a suggestion box. I like being able to go back, circle back to people too with their ideas and say, you gave this idea, this is why we can do it, or this is why we can't. And that's where suggestion boxes kind of run into a problem, because often you get ideas with no name, you have no way to circle back. So, give me another couple of months and maybe we'll go a different direction. How's that?
Yeah. I wasn't suggesting that we have an anonymous box. So of course, the most productive comments are ones where somebody actually has some substance behind it, and can answer some follow-up questions about their question. But it would be nice to be able to have some sort of a gentler way to be able to ask questions about the assembly without having to beat the streets, such as Member Mucci has.
Okay. Any other discussion? Member Strand.
I understand also why Jeff didn't send it to us, because it's a real fine line between answering a questionnaire and being polled.
Member Mucci.
Mr. Mayor, eventually I'm going to understand what you want to do and how you're going to, we'll figure that out. But for the people who sometimes might not feel like they have a voice, I'm just going to continue to reach out to folks and just chat with them, see what they're thinking. That's all.
Okay. There's no other discussion. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.